inside everything.
All right, welcome back to a slightly overdue episode of the Strategy Inside Everything. We have been working hard to get this one synced up. Our guest today is coming from halfway around the world, or he's where he's supposed to be, and I'm calling him from halfway around the world. I'm not sure which is the right way, but he is the head of strategy at and he's got a fantastic book out, which we're going to talk about in a bit. Welcome, Eaon Pritchard.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Dude, thank you for your patience as we were trying to get this thing scheduled. There was a lot of back and forth, so I really appreciate you hanging in there while we both kind of work through tough calendars.
That's okay. Life gets in the way. That's the,
Yeah, it sure does. I wanted to, before we dive into our topic, I wanted to let you tell the audience a little bit about your career, because it's a pretty amazing career. Your experience is I'm jealous of it. So I'd love to hear a little bit of your time in London and now what you're doing at
Yeah, sure. I mean, my sort of, humorous anecdote around this is, when you get to my age, then you start to get wheeled out to students and people like that to sort of, give career advice. One of the things I sort of say is have a look at what I did and don't do that. But yeah, I mean, I guess just my sort of background. So I went to art school, and so I was a painter. And then when I left art school, I sort of tried to do that for a little while, but then kind of got caught up in music. So this was in the late 80s when sort of acid house, or it wasn't called that then, but the thing that became that, started to sort of break into culture. So in my final year at art school, we'd gone to see a big Andy Warhol retrospective in London. So this was from Scotland. And that weekend, by accident, sort of blundered in to some of these sort of this emerging sort of club scene or warehouse scene that was starting to happen, and that really sort of captivated my interest and a couple of other people. So really, we went back up the road and then decided we were gonna run sort of illegal warehouse parties and things. Did that for a few years. It led to record labels, actually making records and music, and I'd sort of DJ'd, around Europe till about 1995, 96. And then I thought, maybe it's about time I got a proper job. I think I was.
Why? I didn't even know about this part, and I'm even more jealous.
Well, I guess, I mean, a lot of my contemporaries were at the time were people like, I don't know if anyone's heard of these people, but this was even people like Sasha, John Digweed, Justin Robertson, and all of these, Paul Oakenfold. So they were just all, just sort of ex-football hooligans or whatever, guys like me. But through a combination of obviously talent and luck, they kind of made it big. And I got to the point where I thought, actually, it's probably not going to happen, beyond the level I was at. So, I thought maybe need to actually think about a proper job, So, but during the process of doing the music, we'd started some record labels, and of course, this is in the old days when they were big 12-inch black plastic things.
I vaguely remember this. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had to design labels, and you had to design sleeves and posters and things. So because I'd been the arty one. It was like, right, well, you can do that. So I had to figure out how to use a sort of rudimentary Apple computer, and just sort of really blundered into sort of designing things there. Sort of became a graphic designer initially, working for things like newspapers, like just making up the little 10 by 2 ads for the newspaper. locally. And then towards the end of the 90s, when this was before broadband internet penetration, people had the idea that the way to get the internet into people's homes was through the television. And so I went to London thinking interactive television is going to be the next big thing. Went to London to work for Sky TV,
Oh, wow.
doing that, or Sky B as it's known. And then, of course, then I was right in the middle of the first wave, really, of sort of the kind of digital agencies. So there were people like Dare and Poke in London that were sort of blazing that trail. So I joined a small agency called Weapon 7, now a huge agency. There was only about 5 of us at the time. We worked in a little corridor of FCB's office in Newman Street. And really sort of pioneered a lot of, there was a lot of optimism for what digital
all the potential,
advertising.
everything that could possibly happen.
Yeah, and so it was, and the agency, won a lot of awards, things like BAFTAs as well, not just advertising awards, for some of the stuff we were doing. Then got acquired by Omnicom and became very, very big overnight. We went from like 10 people to 50 people. And then it got a little bit sort of too big. And I think some of my paths that I'd wanted to pursue then became more difficult, obviously, because there was more people in there. So I left Weapon 7, did a couple of other things, and then around, so it was 2010, I got a call saying, have you ever thought of working in Australia? And I was like, well, no, but I'm thinking about it now. And, because I used to, I lived outside of London in Hampshire, so I'd get up at 5:30 in the morning and go and sit on a train for an hour and a half to get into Waterloo, and then sit on the sort of disease-ridden tube to get up to West London, and so I had.
You make it sound so glamorous.
It was all glamour. Yeah. No, but I just, so in my head I thought, sunshine, beaches and everything. Yeah, that's going to be good. So we thought, well, we'll come out here.
I know the idea of a beach always sounds so great until you get there and you work 60 hours a week. How did you make the move to strategy from design? You were probably doing a lot of strategy at Weapon 7.
Well, no, I was. That was where I kind of got interested. So, I mean, one of the partners there, Mark Brown, was a sort of very well regarded strategy sort of guy in London. So I kind of picked his brains quite a lot and listened to him. And because I'd been a creative, I'd been a designer and then had gone through and been creative director. But in my mind, I thought, actually, I'm kind of not a great creative director. I'm kind of probably average at best. But, I had this sense that I was going to be great at something. It just wasn't that. And I think in those early days of sort of interactive media, I think, we were very concerned with, why is someone going to click this, or why is someone going to want to, participate in this thing. So that got me interested in more of the sort of human sort of psychology, I think, of things, and then that just sort of naturally leads you into sort of strategy. So it was never a conscious, I want to be a planner. It's just gradually over time, I just sort of moved over to the other side, if you like, and then I had this sense I was great at something, and maybe that's still slightly delusional, but I'm a little bit better at this than I was at being.
You had more. Maybe it's just confidence more than anything.
Yeah. I mean, if we get to talk about the book in a minute, confidence, is that's a sort of key component of the argument that I'm making in that, about the nature of confidence and how that's possibly been detrimental to the to the state of the industry today. But
well, let's talk about it. So your book is called "Where Did It All Go Wrong?" Adventures at the Dunning-Kruger Peak of Advertising. If people don't know what Dunning-Kruger is, they can go do a little bit of Google and read the
Yeah.
studies. It's about people assuming that they are good at their job, and it's almost like the more incompetent they are, the more they believe they are good at the job. If I'm oversimplifying,
No,
then I'm probably
that's
suffering
about
from
it.
Dunning-Kruger.
Yeah, it's how does it go? Ignorance begets confidence far more than competence does, or something like that.
Yeah, it's the research that came out of that, the Dunning-Kruger research is mind-boggling.
Yeah, and it's kind of hilarious as well. I think that was one of the things that sort of drew me. Probably sort of 10 years ago, I really started getting interested. It's just the kind of the funniness of so much of what psychology research has kind of uncovered, about our motivations and why we do things. So, I guess if anyone's listening to this thinking, I'm not sure if I want to get into that science, it's like, but it's a good laugh as well, which is,
A lot of it is, when you really read it, you can kind of tell when there's a joke being played inside really dry writing,
exactly,
that
yeah,
they get that it's funny. And I've heard, I think it was Freakonomics did an episode with some of the people involved in that Dunning-Kruger research specifically, and those
okay,
guys get the
all
joke.
right,
I mean, they totally get the joke about
yeah,
what they discovered and why it's funny.
yeah, yeah. I mean, even one of my favorite writers, and is Steven Pinker, who's obviously one of the most famous sort of, psychologist, or he's a linguist, I think, originally, but he writes these great long books that are full of data and analysis, and but also full of jokes as well, which is that kind of helps you along, when you're trying to read very sort of dense things, but but there's a lot of humor injected into there as well. So
Yeah, levity goes a long way in breaking up really complex thinking or really dry subjects. And I
yeah,
know Pinker, from you actually, I know that Pinker writes a lot
yeah,
about evolutionary psychology
yeah.
and
I mean,
how it translates.
yeah, I was going to say the Freakonomics guys are almost like a comedy double act in a way, because there's the kind of, I can't remember which one's which, but one is very much the straight man, and the other one is the kind of, uh, um, the sort of funny guy, So
Yeah, and I think by comedy standards, they're both probably the straight man, but Dubner certainly plays
yeah,
the jokester
yeah,
out of those two
yeah,
guys.
yeah,
Well, let's talk a little bit about today's topic, which is actually super interesting, applied evolutionary psychology. So you mentioned Steven Pinker. He's kind of helping bring evolutionary psychology into mainstream culture, although it's being studied and there are psychologists and others writing the scholarly work on it.
yeah.
But as you and I have both done in our books, trying to make it relevant to people in marketing and relevant living in 2018. Talk to me a little bit about what captured you as you started thinking about it.
Yeah, I think, I mean, my sort of road in was probably about, this is probably about 10 years ago, whenever it was that, so there were those initial, there was like Dan and Chip Heath and Dan Ariely and a couple of others, but there were these sort of what you would call pop psychology kind of books that came out. Predictably Irrational, I think, was the first sort of really big one. And I think for a lot
It's
of,
on my desk right now.
but I think for a lot of people in advertising, that was a kind of moment, when all of a sudden a lot of that stuff became very sort of accessible, and then people like Rory Sutherland sort of picked up on that and really popularized it, and so and Rory sort of, I think he said something about this. He said that the great thing about behavioral economics was it gave us a kind of language to talk to marketing directors or CEOs, and it basically had the word economics in the title, which kind of legitimized it. So instead of what stuff that we intuitively knew, we now had a sort of framework a more scientific framework and able to talk to it, and it gave it more sort of credibility.
Yeah.
And so that really introduced a lot of that stuff into advertising. And for a lot of people, that's sort of enough. You sort of leave it there, and there's plenty to explore. And then there was Thinking Fast and Slow came along. And everyone had this big sort of language now that we could talk about biases and all that kind of stuff, and that was great. But I sort of enjoyed all that, and I used a lot of that stuff. But then you kind of get to a point where you think, okay, you can take something like, well, loss aversion, right, as a sort of that's a tool that you can use. Say, well, we feel loss is worse than equivalent gains, so how can I leverage that in some sort of communication, and that's fine. But then you think, well, why would that be the case? Why would we feel that way? Or confirmation bias, which is
Oh, God.
tendency to sort of seek out corroboratory kind of evidence to back up a point of view that you already hold. Why do we do that? Because it seems like these are foibles or cognitive traps that can trip us up. But why do they exist? They must have served some purpose at one time. And so that's when looking more for what are the sort of fundamental motives behind that. And that's when you get into sort of evolutionary theory, because then, well, you have to trace that back to the time, when our minds really sort of evolved, and that
Yeah,
wasn't
because it's
wasn't in the
not,
modern world. It was 100,000 years ago.
because you can still link things like, choosing a bank. I can still choose that to a decision, to a mutation or a decision-making process formed during some part in human development where we wanted safety or security for our items or for our family.
Exactly.
Some of those things still have to fire when I'm looking at 3 different bank websites and going, well, which one is the one for me to trust?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a little trend in Australia for the moment where it's a smaller market, and so you've got 4 big banks that really are competing for the bulk of the sort of customers. And it is funny when you look at the way that they communicate, and you think that all 4 of them have just got it so wrong, because they don't understand why people choose a bank. And it's exactly that, as a goal. Most human behavior is goal directed, right? And what you want from a bank is, well, you want the generic category benefits, right? So you want to have a card and you want to have an account, and you don't want to pay fees, but you want to really know that your money is safe, right? And you can,
Yeah.
you don't really care whether what particular social issues or whatever that they they come out with sort of grandiose statements about how they're not really about money, they're more about making the world a better place. And it's like, well, I don't really, it's other people's job to make.
Kind of want you to be about money. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you can get a bit cynical about that. And you can also think, I mean, it actually puts advertising into perspective, because you think, well, actually, despite the fact that all of these big companies are spending huge amounts of money, communicating stuff that is completely irrelevant to the consumer, you think actually their business is surviving and growing in spite of their advertising, not really because of it.
Well, let's think about it, because with a bank, they're all going to that mission-driven messaging, and you're right, they're not talking about the category basics. Do you think we, as consumers, I understand what a bank is. I assume it's table stakes, that they all have a big vault or that they all have security, and there's no actual paper money, I'm sure, but they all have the appropriate amount of security. And so now I need a next higher order benefit or a lower order benefit that's more like, oh, they're in the community doing things that can't be bad, or whatever the next thing is, or maybe banks are just a bad example for for evolutionary psychology.
Yeah. Well, actually, because in my book, there's a little chapter in the book which is um, around the sort of premise of asking the question of, can brands be altruistic? Because all of this kind of purpose-driven sort of fashion at the moment is around sort of altruism. But what I sort of argue is that fundamentally what that's communicating is not so much about the altruism. It's more of a signaling device, which telling consumers that we're such a big, successful and safe company that we can afford to waste money on altruistic acts. So it's just really it's just another status signaling device. So there's nothing.
It's just saying we have surplus to reinvest in the community.
Exactly.
Or
yeah.
I think about here in the U.S. Budweiser was hurting for a long time, and they did there was a natural disaster here. There was a flood in the Houston area, or actually a lot of the Southeast, and they shut down the plant, one of the Budweiser plants, and they shipped a certain amount of bottles of water. They stopped brewing beer, they stopped bottling beer, and they bottled a bunch of Anheuser-Busch water.
Yeah.
And they shipped it there to the people that were affected. And it was something like, I'm going to say it was $500,000 worth of water, which is generous. I mean, that's great. And they did it in 24 hours or something like that, really fast turn.
Yeah.
And then their Super Bowl ad was like a mini 30-second or 60-second documentary showing the plant manager getting the call and waking up at 3 a.m. and going and doing that. And I thought, well, you just spent $3.5 million, which is actually more than you spent on the water.
Yeah.
You could have given $3.5 million in water.
Yeah.
That if you were really altruistic. So
exactly,
I line up with you. It's self-serving to a certain extent, but
it's the old saying, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing in public. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. We might as well make an ad about it since we did it and get the credit for it. Jesus.
But that's the kind of thing. That's just coming back to the sort of evolutionary theory. I mean, that's why it's such an elegant theory, because you can look at any kind of phenomenon like that. And then sort of you keep asking why until you get back to that the sort of ultimate motivation for that behavior, which is, in a sense, if you're going to look at what Budweiser did there, it's kind of akin to a sort of mate attraction type strategy that you might see in nature, so a conspicuous display of resources in order to attract, either mates or or just friends, or people who you might want to form alliances with. So I get, I mean, that's the interesting thing about the theory, because it's so simple that you can look at just about any phenomena and through that lens and find an explanation for it. There's a guy called Matt Ridley, who's an economist, I think, but a sort of Darwinian economist. He's written a book called The Evolution of Everything. And it's like 12 chapters looking at technology, politics, entertainment, and explaining all of these things through that lens. I mean, that's a great sort of little book to have in your desk drawer, because you can just, any sort of challenge that lands on your desk, you can whip that out and then categorize it, and then, now,
it ties it back to like a core seed of human evolution.
Exactly. Yeah. Because one of the big problems, I don't know about you, I have this kind of joke that, these rubber stamps that you can get made, that you would stamp it on invoices and it says paid or whatever.
Oh yeah, sure.
So I wanted to get one made that said "not an insight." And that would save me time, when I just go, not an insight.
We used to work with a creative director who had one that said "been done," and he used to stamp it on your work.
Very good. Oh well, there you go.
It was pretty genius.
Yeah, nothing original.
Well, you actually, that's a great point, because what you said about status symbols, the idea of people choosing Adidas or Nike to kind of find their tribe, and what we're seeing, I don't know what politics are like in Australia, but here in the U.S. and certainly in parts of Europe, we're seeing it as well. That this tribalism and the kind of the filter bubble that people are putting themselves in to try to line up with people that are like-minded and similar, and that comes down even on the brand terms. If you're an Under Armour person or a Nike person or an Adidas person or a Kappa person, like whatever brand you choose, it kind of it lines you up with the values of those other people.
I mean, there's all kinds of for instance, just thinking about sort of sporting goods, I tend to be an Adidas person now, but the reason for that is my big sport is football, soccer. Right? So my team, Aberdeen, they were really our heyday was in the mid '80s, and we won a big European cup final back then. But the kit that they wore was an Adidas kit. So anyone that's an Aberdeen supporter is very loyal to Adidas, but it's nothing to do with Adidas. It's to do with the fact that when our tribe were successful, that was the emblem, of the tribe. So if you go to an Aberdeen, football match now, everyone in the crowd is wearing Adidas sneakers.
Are they still represented by Adidas?
Yeah.
So just for life, that's it. It's locked in now. Yeah, that's it.
But I think
here in the U.S., the teams switch too much to get like a loyalty out of it. The MLB and NFL switch providers every 3 or 4 years.
Okay, yeah. But you probably actually, if you went into most people's closet and pulled out their branded sportswear, you would probably find that there's quite a mixture. People are quite loyal to the category, but we'll have a number of different brands in there. Probably, I mean, this comes back to the sort of Byron Sharp type stuff, that brands in a category will share their customers with other brands in corresponding with the size of brand. So I mean, Adidas and Nike are of a similar size, so people will buy the products of both. And then Reebok or something is slightly smaller, so they'll have fewer of those things. I've kind of wondered about that. I wonder, can you tie that back to some sort of Darwinian principle, and so this is maybe a little bit spurious, but I had this kind of thought that back in the savannah, when we were hunters and gatherers, if you were gathering berries or fruit or plants, then it makes sense to not go to the same place every day. Right.
It's availability. Yeah. It's what's available when on the days when you go out gathering. Yeah. Well, maybe there was only Reebok. Maybe there was only berries.
That's it. But you want to spread where you sort of collect from, because if everyone went to the same place and picked those berries, then very soon there would be no berries in that place. So you have to. It's a bit like why farmers leave a field, for a year without planting anything in it. To allow that the soil to sort of regenerate with nutrients or whatever. So I don't know how spurious that is, but possibly
it's a loose connection. We're not scientists. Okay.
Yeah, but we might, because people don't go to the same supermarket every time. You spread it around.
And part of it is where you are on your path, coming home from this time I'm coming home from work. Next time I'm coming home from dance class with my kids.
Exactly.
So I stop at a different place to get groceries. Yeah. So availability is a big part of evolutionary psychology, I think, is what's convenient, and convenience comes from safety. If I venture too far from my cave or from our camp, I'm putting myself at risk of a bigger animal than me or another tribe seeing me. How can I stay close to home and make it simple for myself?
Yeah, all that still holds, I think.
Yeah, I think it all does tie, and it's interesting as you keep reading deeper and deeper. You always see Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you go, I don't know. It seems like technology has moved us past that, but ultimately, it can all be tied back to those main categories.
I think the Maslow thing is interesting. Some people recently have kind of debunked that a little bit, really like looking at it through a sort of, because I think at the top of the Maslow pyramid is the idea of self-actualization. Whereas from a sort of more evolutionary standpoint, I mean, we know that there's two ultimate drivers of behavior, which is survival and reproduction. So from an evolutionary standpoint, they put parenting at the top of the pyramid, because obviously that is fundamental to getting your genes. Well, I mean, you've produced offspring, so your genes are in the next generation, but then you want to protect them for long enough that then they can reproduce, and then your job is done, because you've successfully got two generations down the line, and so
You've become one generation closer to immortal.
exactly.
as Dawkins would tell us, right?
I love because in the selfish gene, this is the sort of most harrowing but kind of insightful kind of, it's quite near the beginning when he says, we are robot vehicles blindly programmed by our genes to get them into the next generation or something. But I like the idea of robot vehicles.
You just want to be like Voltron. Ultimately, that's what you like about it.
I'm the other thing, because I'm interested in sort of where artificial intelligences are potentially going. I think that's the next sort of really interesting frontier, from the point of view. I mean, particularly from an advertising point of view, for one of the things we've been hindered by, for a long time, almost as long as there's been advertising, is the kind of pretty flawed market research methodologies that we have to deal with. And I'm sure you've sat through all kinds of, absolutely delusional brand tracking, surveys, and we have particular tools that get used in Australia for, demographic profiling and all that kind of stuff, which are just none of them, which is just complete nonsense.
No, 10% of what you're dealing with is
exactly. But there's a sense that if we could, and most of that is because of the basically the human intervention, and because we're fundamentally stupid. It's not surprising that it comes out as rubbish. So that's I think that's an interesting area where artificial intelligences could be successfully applied.
How do you think it'll apply? Do you have any thoughts on it, or you just think that level of calculation will be powerful?
Well, just on a very, very basic level, just the ability to cope with far bigger data sets than the human mind can comprehend. I mean, we're not very good with numbers anyway, because we didn't really evolve to do mathematics. So I mean, obviously some people are very skilled at that, but most of us can be fooled by statistics very, very easily. And so if we can create machines that are not fooled, then we might get a better representation, of just even for sizing an audience for something, based on rather than anecdotal self-report data, which is no big surprise. Everyone knows that that's deeply flawed. There's a thing that Philip Graves, the consumer psychologist, he adapted a sort of quote from Edgar Allan Poe, where he says, trust nothing consumers say, trust about half of what you see them do, but trust nearly everything that the sales data tells you they have done.
That's it, where they put their money.
So, that's the, I think we're a long way off an artificial general intelligence. That's the RoboCop kind of fear that people have. But I think, I'm not an expert in this by any stretch, but from what I've read, the people who are experts seem to think that anything of that nature is a long, long way off. But what we can create is, if you think, so the other thing about sort of, if you think how the human mind is sort of constructed, I mean, it's not one general purpose system. It's a number of modules that all sort of came about and evolved at different times in our history, and they're all stuck together. And the kind of these modules are good for doing one or two things.
Right. Each one of them does something and passes the next part to the next part of the
Exactly.
brain.
And quite often they don't collaborate very well. I mean, they compete with each other, for the sort of control of the organism.
Well, isn't that part of confirmation bias, where an idea gets lodged in one part of the brain and the other parts just are left out of the decision at that part, where it's like, no, I've already decided, guys, stop it.
It's whichever module's in control at any particular time. So, I mean, we could get really philosophical, and think about, well, what do we mean by self? And there's an argument. I can't remember who put this forward first, but there's an argument that there's one particular sort of module or process that we think of the self, but really what it is that's the PR department of the mind, right? Which is concerned with reputation and things like that, and it's often working with either incomplete information. So it's a bit like, I think the analogy is, it's if you think of the rest of the mind as the Oval Office, this component is the press office. So it's often trying to sort of communicate to the rest of the organism and to the outside world what it thinks the mind is trying to do, but it doesn't really have all the information.
Right, but it doesn't know for sure.
So, Robert.
But that's the same problem as focus groups, essentially, where I try to get from you, or 10 of you, which is even worse. Hey, what do you think? What beverage do you want when you're hot? Well, I don't know. I kind of want this one, but nobody can really explain what.
That's it.
It's not really intent, but you can't understand.
It's the mind's PR department, just based on very little information, throwing out a plausible explanation that might just, keeps the press pack at bay, for a little while. I mean, focus groups are one of the worst things, because, I mean, people know, as soon as they're gathered into that sort of brightly lit room, with the sort of slightly sort of curled up at the edge sandwiches, they know they're going to be questioned about, so they're already primed to have an opinion on something before they even know what they're going to be asked about.
Right, your guard is up.
Yeah.
And then kind of tribal behavior kicks in, and people try to find their place in
exactly.
the group.
And that comes back to human nature as well. Constantly battling for status. We'll do that in any situation. We'll try and find our place in that sort of hierarchy. And inevitably, someone comes out on top and then influences the opinions of the rest of the people there. So.
Unfortunately, we've been doing more and more online panels and online communities instead of live groups, for that reason, to try to minimize the alpha and to try to give people time to separate from it. We do them over a period of days, and it's, I don't know, when people are writing into a computer, you get a little bit more honesty than you would when they have to stare across the table at 3 other neighbors and be accountable for, like, well, actually, I like to go do this terrible thing that you guys just told me you don't like.
If it's at all possible to sort of disguise what it is you're actually researching, if you can get them even to believe that one thing is being researched, but you're really, by stealth, you're really trying to find out something else, then that can sometimes be more useful.
That's weird. It's such a weird thing.
Well, it's a bit.
It really is.
It's a bit, in the scientific sort of, they call it. I mean, ideally, you want it to be double blind. So I mean, where even the people who are doing the research don't know what it is that they're researching. So in that way, you can mitigate as much as you can. But looking at actual data in the wild is the best indicator of anything. But of course, it's the harder stuff to get a hold of.
Oh, almost always. Well, I want to, before I let you go, I know your workday is about to start. I wanted to talk just a little bit more about the book. Tell me just your biggest takeaway as you were kind of working on that, or biggest thing that you've I know when I released the book, some of the feedback I got, I was like, oh, I wasn't even trying to say that, but it's interesting that you took that away from it. Have you gotten any kind of shocking feedback from the book, or feedback that made you think about, oh, okay, now I can write a second one, because I hadn't heard that yet?
That's interesting, because no. so I don't know if the book is so sort of self-evident that, I mean, how it came about, it's interesting, because I'm writing, now I've kind of got the bug. I'm sure you're the same. Because I'm writing 2 other ones at the moment. So it took me about
You're writing 2 at the same time?
Yeah,
you're psychotic.
Well, because this first one, it's a bit like if you're imagine if you're in a band, right? And so you play around the pubs and clubs for years, and then you maybe get support act on a big band's tour, and then you get signed, and then you have to record your first album. You've had 5 years of playing those songs, and then you whack them all into the first album, and then you've got the problem of doing the second one, but you've only got a year this time. So the first book, my one was based on about 3 or 4 sort of articles that I'd written for Work or for a trade press. I mean, I've been writing stuff for 12 years, just churning it out in the blogging and stuff. But there were 3 or 4 things that seemed to connect, and so I joined them together and then wrote around them, and sort of filled it out, and that was the book. But that was kind of the easy one in a way, because the material was basically there. And so I thought, oh, it's going to be a struggle to do anything else. But then I had some stuff left over that never made it in, plus some new things. And then all of a sudden I had half of the second book.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But that wasn't the second book that I wanted to write. Because I wanted... so the one that I'd wanted to write was... Because this one is, I guess, the closest thing... if you had to categorize it, you would say it's more like a sort of philosophy. Because there's no 10 steps to do this, or blah blah blah. It's kind of musings on stuff, and that's the easiest stuff for me to write. And so this sort of second book that was happening by default was another one of those. But then I got a little bit jealous, and I looked at what Richard Shotton, who's a guy I think we both know.
Oh yeah, he'll be on London soon too. Yeah.
Okay, so I got his. I always because I've got your book. It's sitting in my Kindle. I just haven't read it yet. Sorry.
You son of a. That's fine.
Sorry.
That's all right.
But I got Shotton's book as well, and I kind of sort of scanned it really. Again, I think he'd sort of compiled it similar to the way I'd done mine, because I thought, oh, I've read some of this stuff before in other columns that he'd written. But then I thought, he's been very, very smart, because he's going to sell far more books than me, because he's made a practical book that people can pick up and use, right? Because I think he's billed it as 25
behavioral biases. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting book.
Yeah, and so I thought, that's how you write a book that's going to sell, which is make it something people can use. So I thought, right, well, he's sort of done that around the sort of cognitive psychology, behavioral economics, and I thought, so I don't want to give the game away too much, because I haven't, because I want to get this book out before someone else does it. But I thought, I wanted to do one then, a practical, usable book using evolutionary social motives as a base. Right, and so there are around 6 fundamental motives that drive behavior, and I thought that's 6 chapters, and I'll write those with practical examples of how you can apply that. So that's going to be the third. The third book is going to be much more of a practical, application.
I like it. You're like a Hollywood studio. You're thinking in trilogies.
Yeah, that's it. No, I'm just thinking, how can I make some money out of this? Because you're going to have to sell a few thousand books to make some money.
Yeah, so when you figure that part out, can we do another podcast and you can explain to me how?
Yeah, But the other knock on from doing so you can write these philosophy books and be a sort of cult and sort of, and reach a few hundred people and maybe get the odd speaking gig. But I noticed the other thing that makes me jealous of Shotton is now he's about to embark on a book tour of the US, and I'm thinking, right, that's those other knock on benefits. That's what you want.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So
Well,
there you go.
maybe
Well, he'll be sitting there. If he listens to this, he'll be very pleased that he's causing this kind of existential angst. But
for both of us, yeah.
For both of us.
Well, I'm going to ping him after this. Hopefully, he'll be coming through Phoenix, and I can visit with him when he's in town.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, Eaon, this has been awesome. Give me how can people reach you if they want to learn more? Or they want to ping you with questions.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty easily accessible online. So I guess mostly on. So obviously, I've got my blog, which is just eaonpritchard.blogspot.com. It's called Never Get Out of the Boat.
And I will definitely link to it in the show notes here.
Yeah, or on Twitter. So I'm Eaon P. So EAONP on Twitter. And so yeah, happy to connect with people and chat there.
Very good. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for making time. I know you got on at 8 a.m. your time, so I appreciate you getting in early to chat with me today.
That's all right. I mean, and thank you very much for having me. And the thing is, I don't know about you, I tend to try and get into the office. So if I can get in about 7:30, it means I've got an hour and a half to do work.
No shit, something. Before everybody starts interrupting you. I know.
Before I have to start attending meetings.
Same. So for any young people listening, that's the key. Get in early. You can leave early if you get in early.
That's right, yeah. Well, in theory, yeah. Never happens.
Theoretically.
In practice.
Yeah. When I say leave early, I mean 10 p.m.
Yeah. Yeah, or you sort of get home and you can, and then, once sort of children have gone to bed, then you can work for another 5 hours.
Oh, that's when you're really productive. Yeah, you kidding me?
Yeah. Well, it's funny when I did, talking about writing books and stuff. I don't know what your sort of process was, but most of my stuff was written in that period between about 6:30 and 7:30 in the morning.
100%. 100%, and a lot after hours when the kids went to sleep. Yeah,
exactly. And the guy, I sort of, there's the guy that draws the Dilbert cartoons, which I can't remember what his name is.
Scott Adams.
Scott, by all accounts, not a very nice man, but I sort of picked up that from him before he did Dilbert professionally. He did something else, and all of the early Dilbert stuff was drawn in that first hour of the day. Before it became his job. So yeah. So for the kids out there listening,
there's a whole school of thought from what's that book, The Artist's Way. If you read or listen to Brian Koppelman, who is a film writer, producer, director, he does the show Billions. Did a bunch of feature films. He speaks a lot about, he was in another career, but he wanted to be a writer, and he would wake up at 6 a.m. and write for 2 hours every morning until he got enough stuff that he could go pitch a script.
I didn't know about that. I'll check that out because
it's really interesting.
Cool.
So, all right. Well, let me let you get back to work. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. Eaon, again, thank you so much for making time. I really appreciate it. It was great talking with you.
Thanks, Adam. All the best. And I'll speak to you soon.